وليعلم وليعلم الله من ينصره ورسله بالغيب إن الله قوي عزيز. Translation: We verily sent our messengers with clear proofs and revealed with them the scripture and the balance, that mankind may observe right measures and many uses for mankind, and that Allah may know him who helpeth him and his messengers, though unseen. Lo, Allah is strong, almighty. Sadaqallahul Azim.
Thank you very much, Bida. Jazakallah khair. So it's now my pleasure to introduce a dear colleague, longtime friend, Professor Sean Lewis. It's a pleasure for me to know him for almost now last 28 years since I joined University of Manchester. That's actually when he joined University of Manchester as a professor of psychiatry in 1994 after being trained at Maudsley. He's been the chair of the Royal College Psychiatrists Research Committee. He's served on Wellcome Trust, MRC Neurosciences, and Mental Health boards. Now, he's published extensively, hundreds of papers, books, with 3 citation classics as well. His research interests are focused on the risk factors and new interventions in schizophrenia and psychosis. For me, Sean has, for us, those of us who've worked in Manchester, Sean has been a great support. During our training days, our clinical working days, our research days, he's been a great friend to Pakistan, always there to help, always there to guide. So with Sean, it's such a pleasure having you here with us for this afternoon, and I leave the forum to you. Sean.
Well, thank you very much, Imran, for that embarrassingly effusive introduction. And just one correction, it's the morning, not the afternoon where we are. So some of us are in the afternoon, some of us are in the morning. So it's a raining morning in Manchester at this end. And it's a delight, Imran, to be talking with you again. And thanks also to Nusrat Hussain for setting this up too. And Nusrat is still a valued colleague and friend here in Manchester. And as you say, Imran, you and I worked together for many years in Manchester before you moved back to Pakistan, but we still are in regular contact. So, and thank you for putting together what looks to be a great agenda for the next couple of hours. So, as you said, Nusrat, I'm going to keep my introduction shorter than is on the agenda because I think that's out of respect to the speakers who may have a couple of minutes extra to talk, and with luck, if the speakers are kind enough to keep to time, we'll have some time for 1 or 2 questions too. If anyone has any questions, one way to do that is to put it in the chat, and then I can pick that up at the end, or we can just take some verbal questions when the time comes, or at the end of the 2-hour session. So, if everyone's ready, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Chris Williams from University of Glasgow, who's very well known. He's the director of the Glasgow Institute of Psychosocial Interventions. And I know, Chris, that I'm asking you to kick off a little bit early. I hope that's okay. And if you don't mind, I'll give you, so you've got 10 minutes instead of 7, if that's all right. And fantastic. I will, if you don't mind, if you're still talking 1 minute before the end, I'll give you a little nudge, if that's okay. So excellent. So delighted to have Chris Williams to kick off this morning's seminar.
Hello, it's really nice to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Can I just check that my screen is sharing okay? Yeah, okay, thank you. one of the things that is a real challenge in mental health is one of capacity. It's around the whole issue about there's very few people who are able to do mental health assessments, to do mental health interventions, whereas there's an awful lot of people with depression, with anxiety, with a wide range of common mental health disorders. So there's been thought over the last I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years, this constant challenge of this mismatch between demand and supply, what we're able to offer to help people. And one of the obvious possible solutions is to think about online as a way of disseminating information or treatments about mental health, depression, anxiety, and other presentations. And the argument for that is obvious, that people can go online in very large numbers. It's a very high capacity possible solution. So is this a solution for everyone? And if so, how would you actually build these sort of ways of delivery? And I want to just take a step back really, and just try and look at talking therapies, psychological therapies in general, and just do some first principle things. If we imagine at the top of the screen, we're aiming for help people achieve recovery, to feel better, to be less depressed, less anxious. And in order to attain that, there's been a lot of research that looks at different psychological therapy models and counselling, etc., to try and work out what really helps for people. And roughly around 50 to 60% of improvement when people are offered psychological therapies is due to what's often called non-specific factors. And I'm going to come back to this because I don't believe these are non-specific factors. They're indeed very specific. They're things that can be built into one-to-one work. They're things that can be built into class-based delivery and supports, and also can be built in online. But a very large proportion of improvement that people get from approaches like CMAP or whatever is due to non-specific factors. And on top of that, of course, we want to add in evidence-based approaches. There's lots of ways of working. I've listed cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, here. But of course, CBT is only one of a wide range of things, approaches that can be evidence-based. Medication can be evidence-based sometimes when appropriate. Other types of talking therapies can be evidence-based when appropriate. So this is very much, though, a smaller proportion of the total recovery. And this is very important because we often will emphasize the evidence-based content, the CBT, and with less emphasis potentially on the so-called non-specific factors, which indeed are very specific. And they're very specific and very trainable, so you can train people in this, but also it's very specific because you can also consider how would you build this into resources, manuals, online, video, for example. But ideally you want to bring together these two elements, the evidence-based working, CBT, for example, and the how we deliver it. And I'd like to just really encourage some thinking about this a little, because often we'll focus when we describe an intervention on the treatment intervention itself, which is fair enough. We have to train people to be able to do that and give people access to it. So there's a lot of focus here, often on the content, and there's relatively less focus sometimes on these non-specific factors. And I want to just ask you a little about your own online experiences with using things like YouTube, with using things like fitness videos and things like this, about whether you think there's sometimes a relationship that develops between you and the presenter. In the United Kingdom, Joe Wicks has become very famous as someone who's offered free exercise classes during the pandemic, for example. So how could we add some of these relationship aspects into online, as well as our everyday one-to-one, face-to-face or class-based work? And also, I guess, if you're doing class-based work or individual work at the moment, how do we bring that in over Zoom? How do we bring that in over Microsoft Teams? How do you build that relationship in very specific ways? This evidence-based supports have three critical components that have a clear structure of working. They focus on problems relevant to the person that the person themselves want to work on, and crucially, they're built on a relationship, including an online relationship. So we need to balance those two things of structure and relationship in whatever we offer, whether it's face-to-face work, online work, or whether it's people working through online programs. And our approach, I've been working for around 20 odd years with colleagues in Glasgow. Our approach is to try and make the same content available in different ways. And we view CBT as, yes, a form of psychotherapy, but it's also a challenge of adult learning or young person learning. And we know lots of principles about how to do effective learning. And one of the key elements is to provide information, the resources in a way that people like to learn. So some people love to look for solutions online. Others don't like that or don't have access. Some people love to read books. Other people struggle to read or don't like it. And it's the same with video, worksheets and classes. Been talking with Ozlem's team about the CMAP work, for example, about having videos for people, for the people who are supported after attempted suicide, because it's so much easier for many of them to use than, for example, booklets. So how do you like to learn? Viewing CBT approaches and online approaches as well as being a challenge of learning, and trying to help people make small gains, because one of the truths about online and one-to-one work is people often drop out. They'll come for 1 or 2 sessions and then drop out. So it's very important early on that people notice some quick gains, some small gains that make it worthwhile coming back. And that means having things that they want to work on that are relevant to them that will make a difference. And there's certain things in CBT that make a very quick difference. So putting those up front in a package is really important. And this is from a course, some classes that we run in the UK. They're currently being translated into Urdu. We're doing a project with Professor Hussain and also Farah Lunat and others in Manchester, going to be offering these. There's 2 key goals of what we offer, very clear goals. It helps people understand why they feel as they do, and also how to change things. It's offering educational life skills courses based on CBT, but without the complicated language, everyday language. It's trying to use course modules, a bit like PowerPoint slides and teaching with an audio soundtrack, linked books for people who like to read, and worksheets to apply the new skills. And you can write into the worksheets on a smartphone, on a tablet, etc. So it's a mixture of these different components that allow people to choose how they want to learn these resources. And this would be an example of some of the contents. There's lots of ways. I'm just mentioning these as examples. There's lots of ways of doing this. I'm not particularly recommending these classes. It's just one way of many, many ways that people can approach these changes. But it tries to pick out a range of things that are affected when people are struggling with distress, and helps people learn these things, either in classes or one-to-one. We always put all our resources online in ways that people can also learn these things online as well. So we currently have Chinese websites and Romanian language websites as well, for example. And the goals are to help people feel happier, discover how to stop worrying so much, and learn how to sort out problems, to do practical problem solving, to make positive changes in life, feel more confident, and connect with people around them. Because one of the things I've increasingly become convinced about in CBT is not just about learning CBT skills, it's about feeling closer to those that matter. And we have various resources to help people check their progress and rate and discover what's making a difference for them. And our resources cover a range of different content. So just in conclusion, I'd see CBT as being all about teaching, all about learning, trying to have small gains that make it worthwhile to come back the next time. Very clear goals, as you'd want in teaching. Everyday language, so people with distress aren't having to use a lot of attention and their memory and focus to learn our new language, professional language, before they can start making changes. So everyday language. Considering the audience, whether we're working face-to-face or in classes, or via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, one-to-one, or delivering packages online, is to try and make it easy for people to use, tailored for them. Considering the relationship elements as we design online things, as well as face-to-face, as well as via Zoom, and to really build those things in, and to think about this idea of balancing. How do we balance structure and support with online? We do this in our packages at the moment with automated emails and also phone and online live supports. We're beginning to think about building in a degree of artificial intelligence. Not sure about that at the moment. I feel mental health things are very personal, so I think it would be around the practical things of getting people online and how to use the courses is where we're thinking of applying that at the moment, rather than actually the therapy aspect. And the final thing, just to leave you with, is the thought. Pakistan's big with huge population. It's the same with in the UK. You know, the UK has geographically got areas that are a long way to travel to a doctor's surgery or whatever. And how to scale these things. So whatever packages you're using, I believe that open access, unsupported use, public health use is very useful for many. But some people, particularly with low mood and anxiety, struggle. They need minimal coaching support. Something like up to 90 minutes, for example, of support scattered over maybe 4 or 5 weeks to help people get online in the first place. And have a navigate around, understand what's there, make a few plans, realize what to do if they get stuck, have someone for motivation and support. That can support many, many people, many potential millions of people if it's scaled. And then only a proportion needing highly trained specialist support workers, supporting packages, whatever packages you end up using online. And that way you can scale it across very large numbers of with no support, just automated emails, low intensity support, and potentially a model of low intensity and then low intensity support for people using these approaches. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
by the way, to email me and ask if there's any questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, and thank you for keeping to time. Fascinating start, and the whole notion of non-specific factors in psychotherapy of whatever sort is a very important one. And of course, it's very relevant to digital and online interventions where people question whether that can be a real thing. Got one question from Nusrat, I think.
Yeah. I was wondering, Chris, excellent, and it's good to see the Urdu translations of the intervention. I was wondering, what are the barriers to scale up even in the UK? Hardly, 5-6 people out of 10 receive evidence-based treatments here. So before coming to Pakistan.
You mean barriers for therapy in general, or barriers for online specifically?
You talk about that this has a potential, and it does.
Okay.
That it can, meet large number of needs. So we know about that. Even IAP requires another 3,000 therapists.
Yeah. I think the main challenges, there's numerous challenges. I think the very first challenge is so many people have depression and anxiety, for example, but don't even know that that's what's happening. They know they're not sleeping, they know they're losing weight, they know they've lost confidence. So I think part of this is about education for the public to understand what's going on, mental health literacy, if you like that language, but also education for a very wide range of practitioners about actually what depression is. And in the UK, we've done lots of training of people like health visitors and practice nurses, lots of work in charities, lots of work in schools. And this is a long-term thing, but it sets the wider rationale. If people understand that depression and anxiety are invisible, a bit like diabetes and hypertension, they're invisible, but they're killers. And if they're not, don't actually directly kill people through suicide, they affect people's lives badly. So I think education, I think online, I am a believer in online approaches, but only as part of a wider range of work. I also believe in one-to-one work, I believe in class-based work, and I believe that some people like different things. So for the people who like online, some will hate online. For the people who like classes, some will hate going to a class. For one-to-one work, some will hate and find that highly embarrassing. It depends on the individual. So I think a small range of choices for people is important. Online, the pluses are you can access it any time of day. The downside is you need money. You need access to broadband. You need a device to play it on. Phones are increasingly available for people. Smartphones, but I think we do need to think about the web access because sometimes people have the phone and not necessarily the data. So I think the idea of public Wi-Fi hotspots is important, or places that people could go. In the UK, public libraries are a good place where you can get Wi-Fi, for example. But having places where you can go and focus and concentrate could be potentially helpful. We set up self-help rooms in the place I've worked in the past where people could book in and just have a time, a bit like a mini library, just in a small room, and just work and reflect and get access to worksheets. And it's just the biggest thing though is if CBT is right, what we believe, our cognitions as practitioners, supporters, as commissioners of services, our beliefs will affect our behaviour. So if we're skeptical, if we think things are a cheap second best being online, or if we see it as a threat to our professional status, or see it as something that will end up competing or whatever, I think things won't take off. Whereas if we see these as tools that can be supported by professionals and they can support and supervise and train others, because what's needed for that big workforce is a cascade of training. I think IAPT is fantastic, but it's got a very, very high level of training for low intensity work. And I personally don't think that's necessary. I think people need, the supporters need to be warm, empathic, genuine, the non-specific factors. They need to be local and understand local issues and problems. And they need to be supportive and understand the materials and motivate and help people engage and use them. So the skill base is more easily trained. They don't need a one-year training course, which would be what happens in IAPT. It would be very much something that's shorter, than with trained professionals doing training and supervision. So the impact of the trained professionals gets cascaded many times.
Chris, that's fantastic. A great mixture of practical advice and wisdom, touching on important aspects like therapeutic alliance, and those are particularly relevant to think through in terms of online and digital interventions, as you say. Okay, so let's move on. That's a great start. So our next speaker is Dr. Zakiuddin Ahmed, who's Digital Care Project Director at the Ripar Institute of Healthcare Improvement and Safety. And Dr. Ahmed is described as a visionary strategist and healthcare entrepreneur, as well as a physician advocate. So it's fantastic to have you. And just as before, I'll try and keep you to time, if that would be okay. And I'll flag up when there's 1 minute to go, and hopefully we'll have time again for a question or two at the end. So Dr. Ahmed, over to you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I'm really honored. Digital health is something which has been very close to me for over 2 decades now. I started working in this space around 23 years back. I hope everyone can hear me and see my presentation.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, great. So this is a little bit about myself. And as you can see that I work with 2 universities and different organizations, as well as I have my own company in digital care, which works in the digital health space. But we also work in patient safety, quality healthcare, health research, and healthcare leadership. These are the 4 areas which I'm mostly interested in, and most of my work revolves around that. So just a little bit, since I said that I've been working in this space for a long time, so I've been using this slide to help my audience understand that telemedicine or digital health is not just a new concept which started 20 years ago or 10 years ago, or although it has been struggling and the adoption which it deserved, it has not received. But you can see from this slide that physicians and organizations have been experimenting in this space for more than 100 years, and they had fairly done well in some areas. But obviously, the last decade has been very instrumental in promoting and adopting telemedicine, especially the last few years of COVID. So we call Digital Health 3.0. Which includes all of these different technologies. And obviously, we are not going to talk about these today, but I just wanted to have a summary of the whole ambit or the scope of digital health. And we will touch upon a few concepts during this presentation. I will start with this shift of the digital patient or the e-patient, or sometimes the physicians who do not like these patients call them Google patients, because these patients come to the doctor and they tell the doctor that we've already been to the internet and we have searched about our disease and the diagnosis, etc. So sometimes the physicians actually do not like those Google patients, but the reality is that they are a reality, and they are going to be there, they are going to stay, and they're going to grow. So if you look at these slides, you will see that the Generation Z and the millennials are not going to accept the traditional methods of receiving care in person. As you can see, the trends that they are demanding that more and more technology is utilized by providers, by hospitals, and that's what they are going to prefer in the future. Now coming to the physicians, you can see that this is a slide which represents a recent study in the US. And you can see that the adoption in technology obviously is of the EMR or the electronic health record, but telemedicine, digital assessments or interventions, health applications, decision support system, and medication adherence, are among the top. But unfortunately, two of the areas which we feel very excited about are still not being adopted. The sensors or the devices, which we think that, and we all are wearing these devices, but still the adoption is very slow. And artificial intelligence, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. So as you can clearly see, the challenge is still the same. Integration of the technology into our clinical workforce and pathways and how we work in our clinics and hospitals. We're still struggling how to seamlessly integrate technology in our practices. We all know that mobile, it has been the most pervasive technology in the history of mankind. It has become the #1 technology, and hence the mHealth revolution. So currently we have more than 380,000, around 400,000 applications. But if you look at the number of mental health applications, it's more than 20,000 and growing. So in this slide, I wanted to show that the usage and the adoption of mental health and behavior disorders in these applications is still one of the highest, challenging with diabetes and other chronic diseases. I wanted to show to my audience how a mobile phone can be utilized, for digital health. So a lot of features of the mobile phone, a regular mobile phone, can be utilized for our mobile health applications and for mental health, behaviors and even managing patients who have those diseases in this way. So I wish I had a poll. So if I could have had this poll, I would have asked the audience, how many of you are aware that whether we have a first digital pill or not? So you can actually answer this question to yourself, but there is, and I'm sure that audience is cognizant of this Amplify My Side, which became the first digital pill. So digital pills and monitoring, the medications which are going into our body remotely through technology has become a reality as well. It's an FDA approved drug, and now more and more drugs will be approved by FDA, which will increase the medication adherence problem, which we know that 25% of even the post-transplant patients do not adhere to their medications, even though they received a new life after the transplant. So the medication adherence is a big problem in patients, and it's a behavior problem. As I said, I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence in healthcare, which actually has been a game changer and will remain a game changer. So just to show you the slide that when the CEO of Google, one of the largest IT companies in the world, came in front of the whole world, the first word he uttered or he said in his speech was healthcare. The first word. So you would be surprised to hear healthcare from an IT CEO from Google. So the first word was healthcare, and the second was artificial intelligence. So if you look at all, not most, all of the top IT companies in the world, whether it's IBM, whether it's Amazon, who just recently entered into the space in a big way, 100% of the top IT companies are working in healthcare, and their focus is either artificial intelligence or the medical devices, which unfortunately, as I showed early in the slide, the adoption is extremely low by physicians. So in a summary, there are 5 ways how artificial intelligence can actually revolutionize mental health care. In integrating mental health care with physical health care, so they can support a psychiatrist or a psychologist during their counseling sessions. Obviously reducing the bias and human error, and as we all know that human preventable medical errors are now a reality. The WHO recognizes it. It was just recently a big program was finalized in the World Health Assembly just a month back. 1 out of 10 patients, as WHO says, are harmed while in a hospital. So these are preventable medical errors. In the US, the third leading cause of death has become preventable medical errors. So AI can play an extremely good role in that, flagging early warning signs of serious trouble, making support 24/7, and helping to destigmatize mental health issues. So obviously, these are the 5 major advantages. I also wanted to talk about digital therapeutics. And as you can see that now we have these applications which are AI powered, which change behaviors. I selected these 3 top chatbots which are being used currently. And as you know, that chatbots are helping not only to support physicians, but they're also there to triage. So NHS currently is using these AI-based chatbots, which are reducing the pressure on the GP surgeries, so that those patients who do not need to visit the GP do not end up in the GP and consume those resources, which can be utilized by those patients who actually need them. So I just used a few slides from these experts who are actually working in this space and who are also psychiatrists. So, speech and language, as we see, have emerged as 2 of the clearest applications for AI in psychiatry. And as I said earlier, wearable devices, because using artificial intelligence to analyze those behaviors could lead to valuable insights for clinicians, as Dr. Nasrullah mentions. Dr. Falls, again, a researcher in this space, mentions that AI-aided data analysis could help clinicians make diagnosis more quickly and accurately, getting patients on the right course of treatment faster. So if you see that, a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists and researchers in this space are actually utilizing and exploring artificial intelligence data analytics in improving behaviors of patients or the people at large. As we know that 1 out of 5 patients, 1 out of 5 people actually suffer from some form of mental disease or depression. So, the commonest question which I receive whenever I talk about telemedicine or digital health or artificial intelligence, especially AI, is that, is AI going to replace the doctor? And I used to have this question 20 years back when I used to present about telemedicine. And physicians always used to ask this, Dr. Zaki, are you saying that telemedicine will replace doctors? So I had to actually include a slide mentioning clearly at upfront at the outset that, when you talk about technology, it does not necessarily mean that it will replace, the doctors. What it means is that it actually improves the way physicians and humans work. So for instance, a calculator has not replaced a mathematician, and it will never replace a mathematician. But a calculator helps a mathematician to actually, perform his task much quicker. So a human being cannot match the calculator, a normal human, of course. But so in radiology, we say, responding to this question, I say that those radiologists who adopt technology will certainly replace the radiologists who do not adopt technology, who do not actually use technology in their life. That is 100% true. And if you look at the younger radiologists, it's already there. The very senior radiologists who are not tech savvy and are now being slowly and gradually replaced by the younger ones who are very tech savvy, and they are ready to use AI in their practice. One of our projects in Saudi Arabia, which we have published also, called Raha, Remotely Accessible Healthcare at Home at King Saud University, actually was the first of its kind of connected health model. And the inspiration comes from Uberization of healthcare. So the patients are connected with their physicians and healthcare providers 24/7, not only for telemedicine, but for health education, for patient engagement, patient empowerment, and for measuring their observations, taking observations through devices, etc., etc. In the end, I'm going to just skim through a few of our projects which we are currently working on in Pakistan.
Just 1 minute,
working
Dr.
with the
Zaki,
Pakistan
that's okay.
psychiatrics. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just going very fast, so I will finish in 1 minute. So we started a project right before COVID, and we partnered with the Pakistan Psychiatric Society and started this project, and we deliberately named it Happiness.care. Although the project is for patients who are suffering from depression, but we deliberately called it Happiness. And this became the first kind of a telepsychiatry portal for patients. So, we signed the MOU with Professor Dr. Iqbal Afridi, who was the president of the Pakistan Psychiatry Society, and we launched it together. And we're trying to make it as a one-stop solution for not for treatment to begin with, but to engage, patients, provide them with information and education and resources so that they can actually keep learning. And if they need to be counseled, they can connect with a psychologist or a psychiatrist if needed through telemedicine as well, which is integrated into this platform. So we have a number of psychiatrists on board. This is another project which we have been doing for more than a year now. In fact, 1.5 years, right after, as soon as telemedicine COVID started, we started this health line. And you can see that we're not only providing just general care to the callers, but there is a psychosocial support element connected to this project as well. The other project which we are going to launch soon is an application where we call it TransHeal, and it's a mix of medication and body, soul, mind support to our patients. So this will be launched very soon. So I just wanted to share this and show how we are using technology for mental health in Pakistan. So I'll just end here. Yes, this is the end of my slide. So the best way to predict the future is to create it, as we all know. Thank you very much, and I would love to take questions, or this is my information if you want to connect with me afterwards. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaki. Absolutely fantastic presentation, and both a review and look into the future. And I'm sure that if there are any questions, people can email you or get in touch. So that's a brilliant overview of a very exciting area, including a lot of your own work, which is clearly at the very cutting edge of digital mental health. Our next speaker is Dr. Ozlem Islam, who Dr. Islam is from the Free University of Amsterdam. And so, Dr. Islam, over to you. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Yes. Can you see my slides?
We can.
Okay, great. Well, I also want to thank my previous colleagues for setting up the scene. And I want to, so in my talk, I want to emphasize one of the challenges of implementation of digital interventions, and that is how to engage with our intended user populations. And I want to focus on the context and give an example from Turkish migrant populations. So I'm not going to repeat what my previous colleagues said, but I just want to say that, so yes, digital interventions are promising. They promise to bridge the gap between the need for psychological interventions and the access to them. And but there's a challenge with digital interventions, and that is engagement still. So and recent meta-analysis showed that 24% of people using mHealth interventions in short term and 35% of people using those interventions in the long term stop using mobile health applications. And the problem is they are either not relevant to their needs, or at some point they stop using these interventions. And one of the reasons is that we need to know the context well. We need to know our intended user populations in order to personalize these interventions to their needs and expectations as much as possible. So my research, focuses on understanding suicidal behavior of Turkish migrants, and I have investigated the potential of digital interventions, a CBT-based e-health intervention, in engaging with them in their help-seeking process. And I also tested the preliminary effects of this intervention in reducing suicidal thoughts. So I will also give special attention to mental illness stigma during my presentation. So stigma, it is defined as a mark of shame, disgrade, disapproval, which results in an individual being rejected, discriminated against, and excluded from participating in a number of different areas of society. So mental illness stigma, it does not only determine negative public opinion and discrimination against people with mental illness, but it also leads to the underutilization of psychological services, as we all know. So we did a meta-analysis and we compared mental illness stigma for common mental disorders between ethnic, racial minorities and majorities. And our results indicated that there is indeed more mental illness stigma for common mental disorders among ethnic, racial minorities compared to majorities. And this paper is published in BMC Public Health. Moving on to the suicidal behavior of Turkish migrants, talking about the context, I will emphasize three important relevant theories, and one of them is acculturation. So as we all know, when a culture encounters with a dominant alternative culture, acculturation occurs. And according to bidimensional acculturation model, migrants, they may either maintain their heritage culture or they may actively seek contact with the larger society and participate in different areas of social life. So the disparity between the acculturation strategy of migrants and the majority, the host country, it can lead to psychological distress, and this may in turn increase the risk for suicidal behavior and mental health problems. And to test the relevance of this theory, so I have done a cross-sectional survey to investigate the link between acculturation and suicidal thoughts among Turkish migrants in the Netherlands. And the results indicated that those who participate more in the host society in the Netherlands have more positive future expectancy and they have less suicidal thoughts. But on the contrary, those who maintain their heritage culture have less positive future expectancy and have more suicidal thoughts. And this paper is also published in psychiatry research. So the second relevant theory that I want to emphasize is the cultural meaning theory. So holding cultural or religious beliefs, sanctioning or honoring suicide may contribute to distress, and then this distress may lead to increased risk for suicidal behavior. So in our qualitative study, we found out that failing responsibilities towards family and community was central to the cultural meaning of suicide among Turkish migrants, regardless of the differences in context and or backgrounds. So this research was done, it was a cross-cultural qualitative study, and it was done in the Netherlands and in the UK. So that gave us the opportunity to compare the differences in the context. And shame and stigma attached to suicide and help seeking for suicide, they were identified as key barriers in their help seeking process. So this paper is also published. And the third and the last theory that I want to emphasize in terms of the context is the cultural continuity theory. So according to this phenomenon, migrants might have a tendency to import the characteristics and risk factors for suicidal behavior from their country of origin into the countries they migrate to. And so we have done a very comprehensive systematic literature review, and it showed that this phenomenon might be indeed relevant to explain the consistency in the characteristics and risk factors for suicidal behavior among Turkish women in particular in Turkey and in Europe. So Turkish women who are at risk for attempted suicide, they are more often aged between 14 and 25 years. They are married, experience marital conflicts, domestic violence, and other forms of violence in the name of protecting family honor. So in light of this information, knowing the context, so the next step was to adapt the content of a digital CBT-based intervention according to Turkish migrants. So the key adaptations entailed linguistic adaptations, and also incorporating culturally relevant examples and quotations from participants. So the technical adaptations included reducing the textual information and including more visuals, such as pictures of nature and people who look calm, happy, relaxed. And this publication is recently, the paper is recently published in Pilot and Feasibility Studies. Happy to share if any one of you is interested. So in terms of the feasibility of this intervention, so our pilot feasibility trial indicated that this intervention was indeed relevant to the problems, to the context of the intended user population, but some of them, they did not feel connected with the intervention. And this is again brings us to the point about engagement. So the main reasons provided were the emphasis of the intervention on more severe levels of suicidal thoughts. So for people who were thinking about suicide less often, so they thought this was not a relevant intervention to them. And also some of them emphasized that the more traditional cultural values of Turkish culture, it was overrepresented in the content of the intervention. So some of the case examples were not relevant to their lifestyle. And in terms of the preliminary effects of this intervention, so participants in the intervention group and in the waitlist control group, they improved over time. So suicidal thoughts, depression, and worrying scores in both groups improved over time. So the culturally adapted CBT-based e-health intervention was not superior compared to the waitlist control group, but this was again a pilot feasibility study. So we were not expecting to find effectiveness of this intervention. So overall, so the findings of these research have important research, clinical and policy implications. And first, we need to bear in mind the role of the racial ethnic background in shaping the mental illness stigma. And an important message is that mental health problems and suicidal behavior in particular of specific ethnic groups, it should be understood in relation to the intersectionality of their experiences. Structural discrimination, power imbalances in gender roles, and mental illness stigma. And these problems, they exist in both pre- and post-migration contexts. And to conclude, to optimize e-health interventions for ethnic minority populations in future, the diversity of their experiences should be taken into consideration. To increase the uptake of these interventions in recruitment procedures, we should tailor not only the content, but also the way we engage with these populations. And this is it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Islam. That was a fantastic presentation. And to me, that showed two particular things: the importance of identifying individual and cultural risk factors to develop a plausible intervention, firstly, which in general is called experimental medicine, but it's a very rigorous approach based on identifying psychological mechanisms, which you have done. And secondly, how important it is then to test them rigorously, ideally in a randomized controlled design, looking not only at efficacy, but safety, at feasibility and acceptability, things like that. So a very instructive and rigorous presentation. Thank you very much. We've got time for one short question, if anyone has one.
Can I ask one, Sean?
Yes, please, Nazran.
Very, very interesting, Ozlem, particularly from the point of our work with the British South Asian population in the UK. So what's next? That is what I wanted to ask you. You know, excellent work you have done. So what are the plans for further taking it forward?
Thank you, Nusrat, for the question. Well, we do have plans together. We want to expand this work to South Asian populations, to UK, in the UK or in Europe, or both. We did discuss that there are similarities in terms of the context. And I think it is relevant, the challenges, the implementation problems that we might face. I think, yeah, we can learn from each other in terms of the next steps. And we do have a plan to implement this digital intervention among young people in Austria, the Turkish migrant young people in Austria. So we might start that in September. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Islam, and we'll follow your research with great interest. It's very exciting. Thank you.
Thank you.
So next we have an esteemed colleague of mine in Manchester, Dr. Warren Mansell, who is a very creative and imaginative researcher, clinical psychology by background, but interested in a wide range of issues, and particularly known for his thoughts about transdiagnostic issues in terms of mechanisms in mental health. So Warren, it's delightful to have you, and I'll pass over to you. Carry on, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharon, and thank you, Nusrat, for inviting me to this. I'm hoping to touch upon a lot of what the themes are that earlier speakers have covered. I've produced an overview slide, which I think will form the main basis of my presentation. So I'm hoping that this will come up for us all. Can everyone see this overview slide? Yeah, super. Okay, so the foundations of my approach are twofold. Firstly, like Sharon was mentioning, the transdiagnostic approach, which is not a theoretical approach. It's a way of bringing together empirical evidence. And I use perceptual control theory to try and explain psychological distress that is transdiagnostic. And using perceptual control theory, I've been involved with the development and the evaluation of a number of different formats of delivery. And I'm going to cover each of those briefly, but I'm going to cover Milo in some detail because it's artificial intelligence system. So firstly, the transdiagnostic approach. We published a book in 2004 showing that of the cognitive and behavioural processes that have been identified in diagnosable psychiatric disorders, all of those tested are transdiagnostic, which means they're systematically found in every disorder that they've been tested. So that includes avoidance, safety behaviours, selective attention, experiential avoidance, etc., etc. And that's not actually unique to psychology. You can also point to the transdiagnostic aspects of genetics, like the COMT2 gene, or the transdiagnostic aspects of social factors, like expressed emotion. And these processes seem to be on a continuum with the general population. There's no clear dividing line between someone in the general population and someone who seeks a clinic. They just score higher on things and are more bothered and troubled and impaired by them. So that work back in 2004, that is also continuing, but that sets a foundation for then looking for a theory that explains distress that is transdiagnostic. And a while ago, because I was so struck partly by the themes of control and loss of control within mental health, and I was also uncomfortable with the link between cognitive theory and behavioural theory, and I felt there needed to be some way of tying in higher level processes to behaviour. And I came across perceptual control theory at this time. PCT states that behaviour is the control of perception. So everything that we do is a way to make our inputs, our sensory inputs and our experiences the way we want them to be. Just as much, it might be our arousal level, it might be our sense of confidence, it might even be the tone of voice that we use. The idea is that we are controlling those perceptions. There are so many things we control, so we organize them in a hierarchy. Lots of convergent evidence that the brain is hierarchical. Therefore, what is distress? Distress happens when we lose control over something that's important in our lives. And because our brain is hierarchically organized, the important stuff's at the top. It's where we set our life goals and we strive for things like what people have mentioned, connectedness to others, safety, feelings of being worthwhile, etc. And when those are undermined, we experience distress. And whilst that can happen, for example, with a trauma or an aversive event, the aspect that is most pernicious, that undermines our control, is conflict and goal conflict. And just to kind of illustrate to you a really simple example, this is some research that we did where we tried to plot people's goal structures in a hierarchy and then identify where their conflicts were. So this is somebody who at quite a very high level wants to lead a good life, but in order to do that, they have two kind of views of themselves. I'm someone who helps others and I'm someone who fulfills my ambitions. Those two roles were in conflict for this person. But even within the helping domain, this person was in conflict about whether they should help their mother at home or accept they can't help the mother's medical condition, and they're in conflict and striving over those. Obviously, for all of us, this is much more rich than this. It's like a branching root network of goals we have. With at the bottom here, I've labelled the kind of physiological and behavioural systems that we use to interface with the world. So therefore, how do we manage mental health problems if this is what's going on? We need to resolve that goal conflict. If the brain is hierarchical, we need to go above where that conflict is, and we need to explore all the facets of our goals and how they're impinging on each other. And so it's argued that the way we do that is through talking, through writing, through formulating. It's about expressing our problems and approaching them with a curiosity. And a curiosity that catches things at the edge of our awareness and angles on things that we might not originally think about. That's where the therapist comes in with their curious and Socratic questions. And that leads to a detailed exploration of the problem. And I don't know if you've all had this when problem solving. Once you've kind of ruminated over something for long enough, you put it to one side and then the solution pops into your head a bit later in the day. This, we would argue, is the product of reorganization, which is an internal process that resolves goal conflict. And it's the reason why, for example, exposure in behaviour therapies need to be sustained. And it's the reason why, within, say, person-centred therapy, we need to engage with the emotion that we're experiencing. So how do we kind of put that into action? We have a face-to-face therapy called Method of Levels, where the therapist asks curious questions of the client who's talking about a problem and helps catch these fleeting thoughts. We have a group course, which is a 6-week course for people who come along in person between numbers of about 6 and 20, and they learn about this theory, but they apply it to their everyday lives. And both these we've got published manuals for. And we also have something we developed during the COVID crisis called the 4 Ds of distress, which I hope to cover, where we, again, it's quite, it's very brief, it's 90 minutes, and it's explaining these concepts and helping people to apply them to their lives. And then we have Milo, which is an artificial agent that emulates Method of Levels therapy. Can people see, is this video running for people? Can you see some typing happening on the screen? Yeah? Yeah. So this is Milo. It's, at the moment, it's on the internet. It's not an app. Apologies for that. I think my my PowerPoint just escaped me because I was trying to run a video on it. Okay, so in Milo, you have a conversation with the machine. You know that you need to talk about a problem and elaborate on it in detail, but the computer helps you doing this by searching your text for keywords to do with emotions, to do with conflicts, to do with insights, and helps you elaborate and work on those further. So it's a way of helping you sort out your own problem in your own head. And hopefully I'll get the slide up soon, but we found that when we've interviewed people about Milo, that one of the most powerful elements of it is exactly what Chris Williams was saying regarding the tailor-made aspect of it and the fact that it builds the sense of a relationship. So hopefully you've got this here now. The 4 elements that people found worthwhile in Milo was talking freely, so being able to just express and put what they were worried about into words, getting new perspectives from the questions it was asking, forming a relationship with this agent on the computer, and broadening their awareness. And it's amazing, like Chris was saying, how much people imbue a piece of technology with with relationship qualities, if you like. Sharon, how much longer have I got?
1 minute. 1 minute. One.
Okay. All I'll do then is I'll just show you the 4 Ds because it's quite an interesting feature. Just to, you know, we've used the 4 Ds to try and integrate behavioural and cognitive methods in a way that we think is much deeper. So we've pointed to the various physiological systems that get out of control when someone has a mental health problem, including muscle tension, fast breathing, dissociation, fainting, racing thoughts. And we've helped people in really simple ways to talk about how their bodies can get in these runaway states, and the simple techniques that some people are familiar with through behaviour methods are ways of re-establishing short-term control over those physiological systems. But we always emphasise this is in the short term. In the long term, people need to engage in discovery, which is at the top of the 4 Ds, which is really what Milo and method levels do, help get to the bottom and the root of what is consistently getting that person into stressful and distressing situations. So I can round up with that. I'll just show the last slide. If anyone's got any time for any questions.
That's great, Warren. Thank you very much. That's very clear, and again, a comprehensive and persuasive psychological model leading through to a therapeutic approach, which is now a digital approach. Can people try Milo themselves, Warren, online?
Yeah, they do need to get a username from me, so they would need to email me first.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for one brief question.
Can I ask a question, Sean? Warren, has it been used in severe mental illness, your diagnostic approach?
Yeah, so method of levels has been used in inpatient wards, first episode psychosis, prisons, death row. So it's been used in a number of quite challenging situations and in severe mental health problems. In inpatient wards, it's particularly helpful because the psychologist can say to every patient that comes into the ward, come and see me whenever you want, talk about whatever's on your mind, and providing there's no other patients and I've got the time slot, you can have the time that you want. So it's very much putting the sense of control back to the patient in a way that in an inpatient ward, people feel very restricted and out of control with respect to many other aspects of their emotions and their lives.
Warren, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm sure that people might be in touch to find out more, particularly about Milo. Thank you very much for a really interesting and persuasive presentation. So next up, we're lucky to have Professor Madea Malik, who is CEO of Syntax Health Projects, and she is a professor of pharmacy practice in Pakistan and widely published with a big research program. So, Dr. Malik, we're delighted to have you to contribute. So please carry on.
Hello to everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me at this prestigious forum to speak here. And I'm not going to take much time because I always say this to Dr. Nusrat that you always give very less time, especially to the females to speak. And it's really very difficult to wrap up in just 7 minutes, but I'm going to try
We'll
my
have
best.
an hour and a half, Professor Mann.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. So my name is Professor Dr. Matim Chowdhury. I'm working at Hamdard University as a professor and director. And I have also my company registered as a CRO in Pakistan. So we are probably working with some international partners for promoting research collaborations in Pakistan and other developing countries. So I would just like to share a pilot project on which we were working. So we basically did a pilot project with the name Development and Validation of a Prototype Mobile Application for Mental Health Screening of Population in Pakistan. I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I would just like to start with a quote by William A. Zelmer that bring about a change within a diverse profession such as healthcare profession. One needs a large number of people pulling in the same direction. Before one can get folks pulling in the same direction, one needs to get the agreement about the best direction to move. So I think, like coming to the point now, the best direction to move ahead is basically, I think, incorporation of digital health for screening as well as for diagnosis, management, and prevention of certain mental disorders as well as other health care disorders too. So I would just like to share some global statistics with you regarding mental disorders, and then I'm going to start sharing about my project. So the mental illness constitutes about 13% of the total disease burden, and the mental health disorders, basically the people living with it is 1/3 of all the years living, and 8 million deaths globally. People with severe mental disorders die 10 to 20 years sooner than the general population. And beside this, around 1 in 5 of the adolescents basically experience, the world children and adolescents have a psychological disorder, and about half of the mental issue begins before the age of 14, and nearly 2/3 of the individuals with known mental disorders never look for proficient help. And if I talk about Pakistan, the mental health issues or disorders make up about like 4% of the total disease burden in Pakistan, and nearly 24 million of the people need psychiatrist assistance in Pakistan, and we have only allocated 0.4% of the total budget to mental health issue for addressing mental health issues in Pakistan. So this gives us a food for thought that how we can contribute as pharmacists or other healthcare professionals working in interdisciplinary team, and how we can help to screen these people and then to provide them the required services which they deserve to be offered. So we look at the literature to dig out some evidence that what were the successful interventions which had been implemented for addressing these issues worldwide, and we came up that MobiCog and CD Dementia were the two mobile health apps which were used for dementia screening. Simple was another mobile health application which was used for managing bipolar disorders. Lexicon is one of the very successful mobile app which is being used for depression screening. Then there was another app for mood tracking. MedLink is one of the app which is been proven to be successful for increasing medication adherence, especially among the people with mental health issues. And there was another app with the name My Health PA, which is being successfully used for promoting health lifestyle monitoring, specifically among the patients suffering with mental health issues. There was another sleep self-management app, and one of the best app which is being recent has produced a great result is Prime, which is specifically focusing on cognitive neuroscience issues. And then there was another app which is being used for suicide prevention, and VCope is another app which is being used for self-management and schizophrenia. So coming towards our project, like we had these wonderful interventions which are going around globally and who have like produced some substantial successful results for the screening purposes. So we decided to launch our own app for that is basically a prototype for screening for mental disorder with the name MICA 8. MICA stands for Mental Health Initiatives for Community Awareness, and we basically developed our first app. I'm not going to get into the details of the app, but I'm just going to share the small features because I would be more interested in sharing the result which we got from this app. So basically we designed this app and we already incorporated the pre-validated screening tools inside it to screen the mental health issues. And we also had planned a short intervention on a certain, you can say, a number of respondents. The total sample size was 2 for this particular intervention. 100 were in the control group and 100 were in the intervention group. And we did the follow-up through telemedicine conferencing technique, and we had other healthcare professionals, and we also had a chat board for providing further information after we have screened the patient and we see that the patient is suffering from certain kind of mental health issue. So now I would like to share a few results which we got by this app. We used GAD-7 for the assessment of anxiety, and we observed that only 18.5% of the respondent had no anxiety, while 8.5% had severe anxiety, and 32% of the respondent had mild anxiety. We used PHQ-9 for assessment and screening of depression, and again 14% of the sample, they do not show any depression, but 4% had severe depression, and 36% of the respondent had mild depression. We used SRQ-20 for self-reported mental health problems, and we found that 38% of the respondent had mental health problems present. And we used WHO-5 for assessment of well-being and positivity among the group, and we found that it was really encouraging to see that 10.5% had very high well-being, while 40.5% were having high well-being, and only 9% of the sample had very low well-being. Then we use CSE, that is the coping skill efficacy questionnaire scale, and we assessed the coping skill among the community, and it was again encouraging to notice that 74.5% had moderately fair coping self-efficacy. We also collected some feedback about the app by using the MAUQ questionnaire, and 92% of the people found the app really useful, and 90% of them were satisfied with the app, and 80% said that they are ready to use the app again, and 85% felt comfortable using this app in the social settings as well, and 82% said that the app was easy to use. We also assessed the intervention through statistical analysis to see that is there any difference between the control and intervention group, and we found significant differences among the two groups. So we concluded that moderately higher prevalence of anxiety, depressive symptoms, and common mental health issues were reported among the respondents aged 18 years and above in the community. But it was again very promising and encouraging to see that positivity, well-being, and coping skills were also found better among the community. So there is a high possibility that with certain psychosocial counseling and intervention, we can break the stigma associated with certain mental health issues in Pakistan related to our culture. So we also applied that intervention, and it proved that the app was successful as the level of anxiety, depression, mental health problems were found lower, while emotional well-being, positivity, and coping skills were improved among the post-intervention group. The feedback regarding the use of mobile app was found acceptable in terms of ease of use, interface, and user satisfaction, but still we identified a few features which needs to be incorporated in the app after we are going to go for its bigger launch. So finally, we reached this conclusion that on the basis of this pilot project and the prototype app, that the early screening of mental health issues with the help of screening app might serve as the key measure for preventing the rising burden of mental disorders in Pakistan. And then we have this, the result, we have this evidence that it can also help our stakeholders, our healthcare professionals to devise certain effective interventions to address the social stigma attached to this, and also to provide an easy mean for the community to overcome and to talk about the mental health issues. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm there.
Thank you very much, Professor Malik. It's a very elegant presentation and a great demonstration about how an app can be useful both in screening for mental disorder and for intervention, and could be acceptable too. Time for a question from anyone? If not, I'll just ask one question. I was very intrigued to see that you'd measured how comfortable people are when using the app in social situations, because potentially that is an important issue. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yes, actually, Louis, we had this questionnaire, which was a pre-validated questionnaire for basically validating the app. So it has specific questions that, are you comfortable to use this app? Like, are you comfortable with using your app if you are sitting anywhere, like at your place or at your workplace, and you would like to screen, and would you like to share the information, and how are you comfortable with sharing your specific symptoms, or if you're facing any issues at the app. So most of the people were comfortable, because we think that the questions were devised in such a way that they were not being very, offensive, or they set the social and the cultural aspects. So I think that was one of the things.
Yes, a really key issue, I think, and one that often is not left measured or addressed. So thank you very much again for a brilliant presentation, and we'll follow your work with interest.
Thank you.
So next we have, where are we now? I'm struggling with my, so Imran, it's you, is that right? Or so Imran Chowdhury needs no introduction, I hope, from anyone. So Imran, we're delighted to hear what you have to say, and please carry on.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. We've had some excellent presentations. It's really been a very productive session so far. So I'll be talking about the work that our group has done in relation to psychosis with mobile-based interventions, and particularly talking about this culturally adapted behavior therapy for first steps of psychosis in Pakistan. Now, I think we've heard a lot about it, how this digitalization is revolutionizing our life. There are literally more than 5 billion people using phones, 4.5 billion or more using. Beta, can I have the next slide, please? So 4.5 billion using internet users. And you know what, just in the last 12 months in this COVID, the growth for social media utilization has grown by almost 500 million now to 4.2 billion, which is massive. Next slide, please. Now, this slide is slightly dated. Dr. Zaki very eloquently pointed out that actually the number of mobile apps we have now for mental health, for health and fitness applications, not mental health, for health and fitness applications is almost 380,000, which is massive, not just for accessing data, but for critical services, tracking doctors, regardless of their location, delivering interventions, and a lot more is coming up. Next slide. Now, the government of Pakistan, with the leadership of our dynamic Prime Minister Imran Khan, launched an initiative, a Digital Pakistan Vision, in December 2019. And they have multitudes of projects. Some of the projects related to health in general have been Sehat Kahani is one of them, which is looking at creating accessible healthcare for millions of women around the country, particularly in the peripheries. There's a Smart Village project, which the Ministry of Information and Technology has launched for not just in the 4 provinces, but also in Gilgit-Baltistan and Islamabad itself. Next slide, please. I think one of the things that has helped the government is particularly to use the digital technology in this COVID pandemic challenge, not just for production of 3D images and producing the ventilators and things, but also for smarter lockdowns, which have been very effective in Pakistan in curtailing this pandemic, and it's been very, very effective. There's also use of technology for delivering the strategic development goals in Pakistan, and hence a lot of initiative on governmental levels is taking place to use this mass digitalization to the advantage of improving efficiencies and efficacies. Okay, so next slide, please. Now, our group has been working on mobile health for last few years, and this is just to share some of the work we have done so far. A systematic review that we published a few years ago in 2017 for looking at mobile health-based interventions for treatment of psychotic disorder. The strongest evidence we found was related to mobile health technologies for medication adherence. We also found out that there is significant potential of these mobile phones for bridging global mental health gap. That has been repeatedly mentioned by previous speakers as well, and enabling individuals to receive treatment from their mobile phones, particularly delivering it in difficult to reach areas, in remote areas. So then the group has also published papers on understanding the safety and adverse effects of mobile apps and for psychosocial interventions, and the concepts and strategies for people with mental health difficulties. We did next slide, please. We completed a feasibility study. This is a UK work in Lancashire Early Intervention Service, led by Matim Chowdhury, one of our, he was then a PhD scholar, now he's a PhD. So this is looking at feasibility study of mobile assessment and therapy for psychosis from Lancashire Early Intervention Service. Small study, 16 participants, 83% of actually them completed the 6-week study, and 70% achieved the self-compliance threshold. So the quantitative data suggested that the participants felt that their views, it was their view that this tech care was both acceptable and it was also a feasible way of delivering interventions in real time. Now, in Pakistan, we are conducting, next slide, please, this mobile-based culturally adapted behavioral therapy for first episode psychosis. This is the work that is currently ongoing. Now, as in the rest of the world, in this 5th largest country in the world, we've got almost about 230 million people, 183 million cellular users are there, with almost 100 million 3G, 4G subscribers, and more than 100 million are using broadband networks. So access to digital medias are pretty massive. The aim of this study, next slide, was to develop and define an app-based intervention based on what we have already been working on and for a number of years is a culturally adapted intervention for psychosis using patient and public involvement. The goal was to improve the potential efficacy, establish acceptability, and refine the intervention for the potential participants. This tech care app, we are hoping would be acceptable intervention, and that was one of the aims. And within it built was an internal pilot. Next slide, please. The study has 3 phases. The phase 1 is a development of the mobile app and the adaptation. The second is the test run. And the third phase is the feasibility of a randomized controlled trial. I would share with you the the phase 1 bit of some qualitative data on it. So next slide, please. So far, the results have been encouraging from the feedback we've had from our participants. They felt that they would be interested in reading informative material, messages on the mobile, which was quite accessible. They had a very strong suggestion, keeping the cultural and religious context in mind, that they felt that surahs from the Holy Quran would be useful in the right context, information about medication, psychoeducation, and information on delusions, hallucinations, and particularly using relevant images and pictures, which they would find it easy to access. Most of the participants felt that they could use the app in their own free time, and they found it very helpful. Next slide, please. There was a suggestion, very wisely actually, that the app should accompany a small booklet on how to use it. So if they get stuck, they get stranded, they would be able to guide themselves. They also advised that due consideration should be given to individual variations, and particularly in terms of the course of illness. So, for example, differentiating between how we approach with people with early stages of illness in comparison to chronic long-term illnesses. They did value some face-to-face time, if this could be added, and also voice messages. And both of these could very well be delivered within the app or with the app as well. Now, they also said that apps it should be widely promoted through social media, websites, newspapers, so that more people were able to access them. Next slide, please. So where does it put us in terms of the future for opportunities for digital technologies to have an impact? Now, clearly, we are a developing country we've already been told that there are very limited resources and budgets into health in general, and mental health is really meager, tiny. So workforce shortages is one of the components that can be addressed, particularly with training, supervision, and then also trying to expand the reach for specialty providers. Managing humanitarian crisis, and I think one of an excellent examples is how in this COVID pandemic, the technology has helped to be able to be successful in not just in collecting data, but in also these very successful ultra smart lockdowns that the government of Pakistan adapted. Then we've got a massively young population. 2/3 of our population is below the age of 35, and who are quite savvy in using technology. So it's a medium of getting to this younger population. Also, it's a tool to use the aging population, particularly to help support their mental health needs. And the way our data collections or our evidence base can be substantiated is by large data, is pooling information, pooling resources, pooling data. Again, technology can be significantly helpful in collecting these larger data sets and a leverage of online interaction to facilitate supports. So with this, I would end my talk, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chowdhury. A very clear and exciting presentation, a really promising work program. We've got time for one quick question. Okay, we'll carry on. As I say, that's a really exciting work program, and clearly with tech care, particularly with its cultural content too, and religious content, is going to be a very important intervention in Pakistan in the future, we hope. that brings us on to our next speaker, who's Professor Zainab-Zadeh. Professor Zadeh is President of the Pakistan Association of Clinical Psychology and heads up the Division of Child and Adolescent Mental Health at the Pakistan Institute of Living and Learning. So great to have you, Professor Zadeh, and we'll look forward to your talk.
Hello to everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's an honor to be part of this platform as some of brilliant work has been shared, and I'm very happy to learn some new things. So just briefly talking about the project related to exploratory study of a culturally adapted manual assisted program, problem solving, training-based mobile intervention CAMI, a multi-center, 3-arm randomized controlled trial for Pakistan. So in the next few minutes, I'll be talking about this project that Pakistan Institute of Living and Learning is taking forward. Can I have next slide, please? So just briefly talking about some of the facts related to suicide. So this is 77% of global suicide occurs in lower and middle income countries. And this appears to be 4th leading cause of death in people aged between 15 to 19 years old. Most of this we see that the people attempt to commit suicide by ingestion of pesticides or hanging themselves or making use of firearms. So the figures we get is that more than 700,000 people die due to suicide every year, which conveys that the burden is huge and there is a lot of work to be done. Next slide. So I'll not be talking much about these points because some of the earlier speakers have already spoken about how important it is at this stage to have something which is mobile based and something which is technology based to access such people, because the biggest challenge is accessibility itself. Accessibility to treatment itself is the biggest challenge. We don't have protocols for managing suicidal ideation. They are lacking in primary care setting. There is lack of awareness. There is a requirement to design socially and culturally acceptable, technologically supported, robust intervention for suicidal ideation to reduce this treatment gap. Mobile health app could actually make difference by making it accessible to people, and it will be based on more patient-centered approach. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea about the levels of suicidal behavior and what level of suicidal behavior this app would be addressing. Suicidal ideation is something that will be addressed, which is direct or indirect thought. Suicidal threats is another thing. We have suicidal gestures, suicidal attempts, and complete suicide. So the project that will be covering would be mainly suicidal ideation area. So this CAMI is being designed from the learning of 2 main projects that Pakistan Institute of Living and Learning has already conducted, which is CMAP and YCMAP. CMAP is culturally adapted manualized approach for problem solving, which is mainly CBT based. And this intervention was then adapted from a self-help guide called Life After Self-Harm. People who self-harm, their problem solving skills are poor. That's why they require some sort of support. Why? Because in that struggle, they feel hopeless and depressed. So this manualized program, which is named as CMAP, in this basic work done was around how to evaluate self-harm attempt, crisis skills, crisis management skills, problem-solving skills, and CBT-based techniques were used for cognitive structuring, thinking, and relapse prevention strategies. Now, next slide, please. YCMAP is another project which has helped us learn a few things, and from this learning is being taken forward in CAMI project. YCMAP is again a manualized plan intervention program for youth involved in self-harm, and this program, this project, the whole plan or session was based on 8 to 11 sessions delivered over the period of 3 months. First 4 sessions were delivered weekly, and rest of them were delivered fortnightly. The interventions again included psychoeducation, mainly This is CBT-based, crisis intervention, problem solving, relapse prevention, training of assertiveness and anger management was the focus. Next slide, please. So what we learned from our previous experiences in those projects in CMAP, why CMAP? We've taken that forward in CHEMI, which is a multicultural, multi-center, 3-arm randomized controlled trial involving 2 stages. The first stage of the work is cultural adaptation and digitalization of existing CMAP, intervention for suicidal ideation, and the second stage is a feasibility randomized controlled trial. Next slide, please. First, stage 1 is based on conducting focus groups in which these areas would be explored, and what type of intervention people with suicidal thoughts prefer, their views on how CMAP can be adapted to this population, how this design can be highly engaging, or this to be designed in app form for suicide prevention, how service users can make best use of it, and finally development of a low-cost mobile-based application intervention for people with history of suicidal ideation. Next slide, please. Aim of stage 2, which is 3-arm RCT, is to determine the feasibility, acceptability, and efficacy of an adapted CMAP, which is suicidal ideation-based delivered digitally, we referred, compared to what we have with reference to face-to-face treatment as usual, and mobile-based treatment. 7-side feasibility trial, which is established as a preliminary estimate of treatment effects for CHEMI for the future. Definitive trial will be conducted on the basis of this. Next slide, please. So this slide would give you an idea of stages of development of CHEMI. Focus group would be conducted, selecting design principles in ideation, sketching, and paper prototype. Usability, how user-familiar CHEMI is, user-friendly CHEMI is, defining the app, and then definite trial, which is 3-arm treatment as usual, CHEMI, and face-to-face work, which is based on CMAP work. And next slide, please. So this would give you an idea about intervention arms, what would be happening in CMAP FI, which is problem-solving psychological intervention, CBT-based as I've already shared, treatment as usual, and technologically delivered intervention, CAMI, which is based on crisis management plan. There'll be experience sampling methods used, blended with intelligent real-time therapy. Next slide, please. So, implication of this work or project, which is under process, it will reduce the risk of self-destruction, symptoms monitoring. It will be helpful in promoting self-worth. It will enhance coping skills of people going through this issue. It will empower them. It will be patient engaging. It will limit the isolation period, and the limitations related to that would be addressed. And this will be contributing in building up self-esteem of people experiencing this thing. With this, I wrap up my talk. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Zadeh. That's a really huge trial that you've got in prospect, with 7 sites in Pakistan and with 3 treatment arms. So that's very impressive. Is there a quick question at all?
There's a comment, Sean, if I could. We have been asked by the Parliament Sustainable Development Goals Office to develop the mental health policy for Pakistan and implementation plan. So when it was hosted by the President of Pakistan, and the Mayor of Karachi was also present. So they want us to now bring in routine care, what Professor Zainab was talking about, the CMAP intervention. But at the same time, he said, we do not want to wait when people have attempted self-harm. What we want you to do is look at how you can intervene at the time of suicidal ideation. So now the work is going on about introducing registered in primary care registered for suicidal ideation. And we knew that it's, suicidal ideation is far more common, that we may not have enough people to provide the intervention. So that is where this work comes up. addressing suicidal ideation.
Thank you very much, Nazrat, and thank you, Professor Zadeh, for reminding us too that more than 3/4 of completed suicide globally are in low and middle income countries, so very important. Next, we have Dr. Sharik Khoja, who is the CEO of Tech for Life Enterprises and another high-profile innovator and a leading researcher who's very well published. So, Dr. Khoja, over to you, please.
Thank you very much for introduction, and then thanks for inviting me to this seminar and great talks. Sorry, being in Toronto, it was difficult for me to join for the initial talks that happened in the morning. So my apologies if I've missed something, and I may be repeating the things that have already been talked. I'm pretty sure that a lot of speakers before me have talked about the burden of mental health and many digital health applications that have worked. So I would like to straight come to the point of my discussion, which is the approach I and my team have taken, which is the use of mobile phones for mental health, especially to empower the frontline health workers. And I think that can be the best approach to improve access to care generally and also for mental health. And I will also talk briefly on one of our major interventions in Afghanistan. Next slide, please. So before I get to our approach, I'll just briefly mention about this strategy that has been adopted widely at scale, suggested by WHO. And when we talk about scale up, there can be different approaches, but the strategic action 2, which is suggested here, talks about taking interventions to community level, where people can easily access various services that are provided for mental health. And our approach exactly works on making this strategy practical and approachable for people. Next slide, please. So when we talk about mobile, I saw this slide has been used before as well, so I won't go into details, but for 7.75 billion people globally, there are more than 5 billion unique mobile users, but actual data suggests that there are over 6.5 billion people who now have access to mobile phones, and similarly, more than half of the people now have access to internet and other resources. But the reality is, next slide, please, that for the 7.75 billion people, even though 6.5 billion have access to mobile phone, there are 3.5 billion mobile phone users who have limited or no access to healthcare. So people have phones, but no healthcare. And the data suggests that there are over 1 billion people who are using mobile phones on a regular basis, but do not have access to mental health support or mental health services. And that's why we all have to think how we can use these mobile phones to access these people. And if not directly to these people, how we can make sure that other interventions like frontline health workers in Pakistan, we have lady health workers and many other frontline health workers working with different organizations with other names in other countries. How can they be helpful in reaching the people who either have phones themselves or do not? And we bridge that gap. Next slide, please. So in our assessment of the situation globally, how we can use digital health at an organization called Tech for Life, we came to the conclusion that it is important to develop easy-to-use mobile-centric applications to bridge this gap. We have to ensure that there are low-cost and low-bandwidth solutions so that these can be scaled to a very large level in different countries. We have to empower frontline health workers with simple technologies that can have the best impact, because they can break the barriers, get into people's homes, get to the people who really need services, and provide them with the support that is required. And lastly, we should ensure that the mobile services or applications that are available connect the trained health providers who are rarely available in these countries with the people who need this advice. Next slide, please. So our organization, which I developed, the Tech for Life, for last 10 years, we are a social enterprise, and we are working in about 25 countries just with the mission to design and provide technologies for frontline health workers. Next slide, please. And we have developed software apps, various hardwares for telemedicine, different applications, including mental health. Next slide, please. And I'll talk about one of our major implementations in Afghanistan, just now using the same approach. However, we have worked in many other countries. As I mentioned, we are working with governments in over 12 countries and other organizations in 25 countries. In Pakistan, the whole program of government of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa in many different districts has been implemented by a team, and spreading into Gilgit-Baltistan as well. So similar interventions. Would love to collaborate with many organizations who were here and are doing great work. Next slide, please. So in Afghanistan, with this grant that came initially from Grand Challenges Canada, we focused on improving mental health among young adults in the province of Badakhshan, which is the northwestern province, the remotest province in Badakhshan, as you can see on the map, with borders with Pakistan, Tajikistan, and China. Next slide, please. So mental health strategy in Afghanistan, the duration that we worked on was focused on community-based interventions, but was only one mental health hospital and 5 psychiatrists available in Kabul, only one psychologist in the whole province of Badakhshan, and very few guidelines and protocols that were available for the community-based health providers to use the mental health services. Next slide, please. What we did was, with the goal of improving mental health in the country, we had 3 objectives. One was to reduce the stigma in the community through our mental health applications, for which we used awareness in the community and young adults by messaging to the community, improving their information in local languages. We also tried to improve the knowledge of health providers by conducting online training sessions. So we were actually giving memory chips, which were put on in their mobile phones, and they could listen to all the different sessions that were pre-recorded on the memory chip on their phones. We also worked on empowering health providers through knowledge, and this included improving their mental health information system in the districts, and more importantly, building capacity through blended learning, again through providing memory chips for their phones and having a very structured program for building capacity of frontline health workers and even the doctors who were at the health facilities. And lastly, improving referrals by digitizing the whole MH-GAP guidelines on their mobile phones, so they could step by step screen the community members in the community when these frontline health workers go in the villages, and so they can identify the people who need more help, and when they needed help, they could connect right from their mobile phones through our telemedicine applications with the psychologists and psychiatrists both in Afghanistan and across the border in Pakistan as well, with the psychiatrist sitting in Islamabad. Next slide, please. So again, very quickly, different levels where we had our interventions, different target groups in the community, in young adults, with local health providers. More importantly, we targeted young adults and health providers through text messaging, blended learning, giving them interactive protocols so that it improves their ability to screen themselves and improve their mental health. Next slide, please. I'm not sharing the results of this study that we have published a lot, and we can share more results if people are interested in how these interventions work. I'm just showing the mobile app, which currently the slide shows in English, but we had in local languages as well. And you can see that it was very easy for the village-based health workers to enter patient information, to use guidelines and protocols, go on the blended learning sites and use it for their own learning, and also to show videos to the community when they were sitting with the community members. Next slide, please. These are a few slides of image gap protocols that were put into the mobile phone and were made very easy for these health providers to use. Next slide, please. And then if they needed, this is blended learning, so they could actually go to different sessions and could do even live, sorry, not live, but recorded interactive sessions that they could do. Next slide, please. Finally, if they needed to use a telemedicine application to connect their patients with the health providers, they could send their data and book an appointment, get to the live consultation, and all that was very much possible even in Badakhshan through 3G service that was there, and they could do live consultations even at the community level. Next slide, please. So I'll just end here telling you, giving the last message that by empowering frontline health workers, we believe that we can reach many, many more people through the use of mobile technologies. And the way forward is to build apps for communities and health providers, and also include mobile telehealth into that for better impact in the communities. Thank you very much. My numbers and emails are there if anybody wants to contact. It was a pleasure talking here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharik, and an extraordinary and very important program globally. It really is very impressive, and the whole idea of empowering frontline care workers is a real is really at the focus of what you're doing. And given the resource shortages in the places that you're working, that's clearly very important. Time for one brief question.
Again, make a comment. It's Sean, it's to Dr. Sharik, is we are doing this digitalization of the mental health gap action program. We have not even started right now. We just got ethics approval, and it would be good to, I did not know about your work, so good to be in contact and look at your work if we can do something together.
Absolutely, thank you.
Great, well, thank you very much once again, and that's a very important program of work. Our next speaker is Professor Matim Chowdhury, and is consultant psychiatrist and professor of psychiatry at Dow University, and leads a number of research projects. So great to see you, Professor Chowdhury, and please carry on.
Thank you, Sean. Lovely to be here. Amazing talks so far. So what I want to do is I want to share our work about Tech Mother Care, a digital solution we feel to improving maternal mental health. Next slide, please. So just a reminder that WHO says that currently around 350 million people across the globe are depressed. Depression is a serious global public health issue. 60% people who commit suicide experience some form of depression. And when we look at low and middle income countries, 1 in 4 women experience antepartum depression and 1 in 5 postpartum. Next slide, please. Talking about Pakistan, we've heard before, a population of around 230 million, a third of us living below poverty lines, low literacy rates. The UNICEF, in their 2018 report, have said that Pakistan is the riskiest place to be born in. 46 out of every 1,000 children born in Pakistan die before the end of their first month. And sadly, those who survive, 37% remain stunted. Now, in his inaugural speech, our Prime Minister said, "This is of grave concern for Pakistan. We have high rates of postnatal depression in our women." Next slide. We've been talking about treatment gaps, and just very briefly, again, to remind ourselves, 50% people with mental disorders in high-income countries receive no treatment. But compare it to 85% in low and middle income countries receive no treatment. Next slide. We've been discussing this, and I think we all view strongly that digital mental health can be an answer to address this treatment gap. Next slide, please. So we assessed a mobile phone-based intervention to reduce maternal depression and improve child health. Next slide. So this was a randomized control trial. 3 cities of Pakistan, Karachi, Lahore, and Rawalpindi. We randomized 204 depressed moms having babies from birth to 30 months. Our primary outcome was a reduction in depression using PHQ, and our secondary outcomes were improvement in quality of life and in their knowledge, attitude, and practices. Today, I'm not going to present our qualitative work because it's our quantitative work because it's in the finalization stage, but I'll share some of the results from a qualitative study. Next slide. So the intervention called Tech Mother Care, it included a component where Java-based mobile app, there were momentary sampling assessment, and this was done by an alarm triggered and then questions from Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale propped up on the participants' screen. And depending, then the participants had to respond according to how they were feeling at that current time. Next slide. The other component of the intervention was intelligent real-time therapy. So depending on the response, so say if they had said a yes to the screen, then they were, via text messages, delivered 3 coping strategies to each of their responses. And mainly we were focusing on depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and sleep. Next slide, please. There was an inbuilt individualized crisis plan as well. Next slide. And the intervention was delivered through generic text messages twice in a day. So one in the morning, one in the evening. And the messages were made up of our learning through play intervention, which again has 2 components. The learning through play based on attachment theory, child-parent interaction. And the plus component is the CBT based on the Thinking Healthy program, which adopts a here and now problem-solving approach. Next slide. So the qualitative work involved exploring the perceptions of these depressed moms about the use of this mobile-based app. Next slide, please. So we had in-depth interviews with 17 depressed moms. Next slide. And I'll share some of the findings from the themes that came through those interviews regarding the acceptability and perceived impact of the intervention, and I'll quote participant 3, "The messages that I received on how to relax, such as breathing exercises, and those regarding prayers were helpful in improving my sleep." Participant 1, "I learned how to spend quality time with children by engaging them in play." Participant 10, "I used to be irritated on petty matters, had no interest in household work. Now I feel better and have set the routine and managing time well." Next slide. They did express some challenges. Participant 1, "Finding time to read and respond to messages while managing everything at home was difficult at times." Participant 3, "Sometimes there was no electricity and the mobile was not charged, or sometime I went outside and the mobile was with my husband." Next slide. There were some amazing suggestions. I mean, I loved participant 2's suggestion. For those who cannot read, audio messages should be used so they can also get benefit from this app. Participant 8, "These mobile apps should be promoted through media as well so more and more mothers can access." Participant 4, "This app should have information for children till 5. So we were doing till 30 months, but they obviously wanted, if they had older children, till 5 as. And participant 7, interesting, "Include males, pattern the existing content on how fathers can handle different situations for the betterment of children." And I'll just out of interest say that we did complete a large RCT, learning through play with dads. And based on that, we have recently been funded by Grand Challenges Canada for a transition to scale across the city of Karachi, population of 23 million. My next slide is my conclusion. Just to say that the qualitative findings do support the use of mobile app delivery for depressed moms of young children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chowdhury. That was a brilliant presentation, very clear, and it points up the importance of getting qualitative feedback from the users of the app, who can often contribute very good ideas to its future usability. So that with the Grand Challenges funding, that's going to be a terrific, very important trial in a particularly vulnerable, perhaps, and underserved population. That's mums of young children. Any questions at all? Okay, well, thank you very much once again, and very best of luck with that huge study that you now have to do. Okay, so Nasrat Hussain, I think it's over to you for a few words, please, before I wrap up.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted to show one slide. It's about the Sustainable Development Goals. Aisha, if you are able to bring that slide up, and it's more call for help. Can we go to the, yeah, this one. These are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. What we have been asked by the Parliament of Pakistan is to develop the mental health policy, and what we are working with them is how to align with the Sustainable Development Goals. People have talked about low budget. I think even with the low budget and whatever is being invested in Pakistan across the Sustainable Development Goals, I think we can make a major leap forward if we are able to use the technology. And there have been some excellent presentations today. So it's about looking at all these sustainable development goals, how we can work together. And particularly the goal number 17, SDG, is about collaborations and partnerships. So we would be looking towards all of you presenters today and people who have attended, if they could write to us, how we can work together. We have got to present the first draft to the Parliament on the World Mental Health Day in October 2021. So we still have a little bit of time, how we can incorporate digital mental health into what we are proposing to the Parliament. And thank you very much. That's my alarm, so I'll go down.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nazrat. So he's going to deal with his burglar alarm by the sounds of it. So I'd like to thank all the speakers, really. So it was a fantastic session, and I think that it was a combination of thinking about psychological principles, about the importance of screening and epidemiology and how digital approaches can help with that at large scale, perhaps particularly in developing countries such as Pakistan, and also how that can be linked into devising interventions for particularly disadvantaged groups, those at risk of mental health problems, particularly like young people or mothers of very young children. And I suppose the whole issue about how digital interventions, particularly mobile interventions, can promote accessibility where healthcare is very thinly distributed, such as Dr. Sharik in Afghanistan and Professor Matim Chowdhury looking at the young mothers, and Professor Zadeh also is talking about the importance of how digital can improve accessibility. People in developed countries tend to focus on what's called the digital divide, which is the risk of some parts of the population being excluded. But in my view, that's outweighed by the enhanced accessibility at scale that mobile apps and interventions can potentially provide. So I'd like to thank the organisers on our behalf, particularly Nazrat and Imran, and also thank the fantastic array of speakers. And I'm sure on our behalf, we'd like to suggest another one of these in the future. And we'll also be mindful of contacting Nazrat in view of the global grand challenges that that he was talking about, with an October 2021 deadline for feeding that into the national political process in Pakistan. So thank you very much, everyone. And for those of us in the UK, enjoy the afternoon. And for those of us in Pakistan, enjoy your evening. And we'll speak once again, I hope. Thank you very much, everyone.